What is Ukuphahla? I said this again. Ukuphahla is a ritual reenactment of that which you are requesting.
In Africa, we do not worship ancestors. Let me correct that. We don't worship them. Our historical connectivity to our forefathers is put in spaces of religious connection. That before you connect with the one who made you, you access by firstly recognizing those that have brought you to where you are.
And for me, when I look at the idea of the concept of worshiping God, it's a colonial concept.
Let's educate our people that no one talks to God. Let's just put it as bluntly as all that. If someone says to you, God was talking to me, tell them to go to the psychiatric ward.
People that believe in African spirituality, whenever they are confronted with the fact that they are actually worshipping ancestors, this is the answers that you just heard. These be the things they actually tend to object by saying, to say, no, we do not worship ancestors, but instead we actually worship God. What we do is we actually speak to our ancestors who relay the message back to God. Now, in this video, I just want to address that. Let's say we leave out the fact where we're actually objecting and we're saying people in African spirituality worship ancestors. Let's just say we take it as they say, and we say simply that they're actually not worshiping ancestors, but they're actually speaking to their ancestors, and their ancestors get to relay the message back to God. What I'm about to show you in this video is actually going to shock you in the most amazing way. Because what you're going to discover that this thing of Ukuphahla, talking about Ukuphahla, I'll describe it in English as the ancestral mediation system. Now, Ukuphahla, it's a libation. When we say it's a libation, this is the process where people would actually pour out beer or African beer, umqombothi, to the ground and then begin to speak out the surname names, forefathers' names, call them out, and as well as burn incense, which is called impe. So that is what I'm actually going to be calling ancestral mediation system. As far as I remember, this thing has actually been a membrane to the people of color. It's something like this is the people of color's identity in a way. So if you tell people what you know our Ukuphahla, it's as if you've actually lost touch with your identity, with who you are, the essence of you as an African man or woman. Shockingly though, what I'm about to show you, it is that there was a time that our people, I'm talking about the Bantu people, were at a point where they did not even practice this. And there was a time when this thing actually began to infiltrate the society of the people of tribes. And by such means then, we can actually begin to trace to where it started and what actually caused it. So it's going to be shocking because I'm going to introduce how and where Ukuphahla started, because it's not a thing that was actually practiced before. Now, let's just begin in the video without actually wasting any time. So I'm going to pick a contrast, an interesting, a comparison between us, the Bantu people, and the San people. The San people, it is the guys we know as Khoi today. So I'm going to pick a juxtaposition. I'm going to point out a juxtaposition between these two groups, the Khoi, the San people, and the Bantu people. So then, because why the Khoi? The Khoi, this is by any means, without any objection to anyone, whether you go to anthropologists, whether you go to linguistics, these guys are the oldest people in Africa as well as in South Africa, before even the Bantu people migrated to this side of Southern Africa. They are the Kalahari guys. If you go as far as 4,000 years BC, this is where you find there's rock arts. These rock arts were actually painted by the Khoisan, the Khoi people, because of when they painted them, they began to show their way of worship way before the Bantu people migrated to the southern of Africa. So, and then when we go back to the history of the Bantu people, now when we say the history of the Bantu people, I'll be using a term that is called the Proto-Bantu. When I say the Proto-Bantu, the word proto actually means, primitive or original. So when we say Proto-Bantu, just know primitive or original. So the Proto-Bantu began to migrate. This is 3000 BC. We're going back now to the history of our people. When I speak concerning the Bantu people, if you are unaware of that terminology, just think of the people that are actually now the black people that are, all over Southern Africa. When I say Southern Africa, I go far beyond just us in South Africa. I'm going as far as Zimbabwe, Mozambique. So they actually migrated. This is 3000 BC. They came from what is known as, West Africa. So they came from West Africa. In places such as Cameroon, this is where they came from. The borders between Nigeria and Cameroon, this is where the Bantu people came out of. This is the Proto. So Proto-Bantu people had the Bantu language that they used, which is not the typical language that we actually have today. So that joined them. And then they migrated 4000 BC. The San people were already in Southern Africa. And the migration would, many of them would reach the Southern Africa before 380. When we say AD, we speak about Anno Domino. And BC means before Christ, and then AD means after Christ. For people who actually have never done some of the aspects of history. Now, by this time of 300 BC, the Bantu people did not have what we know today, or what we have today as the ancestral mediation system. Ukuphahla. I'm going to show you some proofs from the academia, not just that things that I'm thinking of to prove what I'm saying. As far as 3000 BC, when the Proto-Bantu migrated from where it is would be Cameroon or West Africa down south, they could not be traced anything that had to do with Ukuphahla, libation, as well as the incense, and using elders in families as a gateway to the spiritual realm. According to anthropology, as well as according to linguistics, this thing would actually begin to appear after here, the ancestry mediation system. So I'm just going to call it ancestry mediation. We know this through linguistics as well as anthropology. The Botswana University has actually stipulated that if you can go as far as to, before 300 AD, earlier, there was actually never, a common ancestral weight. That there was not that root weight. So we've got a group of scholars that have studied these things. Some are actually coming from the Harvard University, and I also quoted Botswana because they're a group of Bantu people, in case people saying it's white man who's trying to wipe out our history as black people. So Botswana also confirms that at the university. So there's also a group that came out, this group, apart from them, there's also a Guthrie as well as a Newsom. So these guys were the researchers that actually put together all the languages that we use as the Bantu people, main languages. So it's about 500 plus languages. You can imagine that, to construct what would be called the Proto-Bantu language. So this is called, in linguistics, it's actually called the comparative reconstruction. The comparative reconstruction, it's when a group of scholars we take out languages from the very root, to say they come from one, tribe, and then they would take out from these clans and then these, sub-tribes, and then reconstruct it to actually try to get back to the oldest or primitive language they used. Here's an interesting fact. There's never been, whenever they reconstruct this, there's never been any word that actually points to ancestral mediation. The root word of that cannot be found. It's interesting because the root word is where many words would actually begin to formulate from. So as earlier as 3000 BC, the Bantu people cannot be traced to actually have had an ancestral mediation system. It is actually found around 300 AD as well as 980. In 380, something that anthropologists began to discover in Broadestrom, so that is actually Gauteng, they found that there's this will be the first sightings or signs that black people now were actually doing this thing that is called ancestral worship, and I'm going to show you how and why it started. As earlier than that, it cannot be found in anthropology. In linguistics, there's no term that links the Bantu people to that. And then in 900 AD, in K2 Mpumalanga, K2 Limpopo, there's been found sightings as well. These sightings actually point as well to a system where you find now, as well as the ones that are found in Gauteng, there's a cattle kraal, Isibaya, and in Isibaya there would actually be graveyards where now there's the eldest people in the families are buried there, and there's also altars. And around this time, in 380 as well as to 980, K2 Limpopo, Broadestrom in Gauteng, was also interesting that has been discovered is the potsherd, where now it proves that the system of libation had actually entered or filtrated the Bantu people. This is the potsherds where you would see that black people now were beginning to actually do libation, pouring out beers, umboti, as well as incense, burnt, speaking to these people in the cattle kraal who were dead, as well as in huts that were huts. There was bases where in the corner of the huts or in the borders of the huts there was the first introduction of what is actually known as umsama. Umsama now had actually crept in around 380 as well as 980. Now interestingly, prior to that, the Proto-Bantu people did not have this even engraved in their language. But what you find with the Proto-Bantu language, since that now they did not have the root word for ancestral mediation system, they did not have that root word from whence it would be expected that each tribe would actually draw from. But instead, the root word that appears in terms of worship, it is the word which is actually known as Nyambi or Njambi. So according to some tribes in Africa, they would call it Jambe or Nyambe. This root word would actually mean now the worship of God. So Jambe or Nyambe is also seen even today as far as you go to the Congo people, and I think some aspects in Malawi as well as you move forward. Now, this is interesting. It's a root word for God, which means that the Proto-Bantu people actually had the understanding of God. There's a root word for God, prior to Christianity. But interestingly, there's no root word for the ancestral mediation system. Now, this is what gets interesting as well. I just want to actually show you something that's quite interesting concerning this research. Concerning the sand people that the Bantu people found already in Southern Africa, there's actually kind of three oldest groups that are found in Africa. I'll be focusing on the San people, and then another one that you need to be aware of, it is the Hadzabe, where we see Bo Chaba. Bo Chaba, for those who see them on TikTok, they come from the Hadzabe group. And there's also the Sandawe. These are the oldest groups. So this has been proven, according to they have the oldest DNA, it's proven. So these are the oldest groups, the San, the Hadzabe, and the Sandawe. So what is it that these people worshipped? Then did they have a system? In fact, all of these, we find by this that Africans had a knowledge 3000 BC concerning Jambe, which is God, even though there was not integrated or centralized system of worshipping their ancestors around this time. When we look into the San people, we also find that it's the same thing. The San people had the knowledge of God, as well as the Hadzabe and the Sandawe. They still retain the knowledge of God. Interestingly, where many people think concerning this thing of Ukuphahla, that this is identity of black people, this is part of who we are, it's part of where we come from. When we lose it, we kind of lose a sense of our identity. We lose the essence of who we are. Interestingly, the oldest groups in Africa, as I'm about to prove to you, they still do not retain, the veneration of the dead people. When they view it as something that actually brings in cases and problems to society. Let me prove this to you. So, a group of students came out of Harvard to study the San people. Now, amongst the people that have studied them, others came in different lifetimes. There's Richard Katz, so I'm bringing these resources. There's Richard Katz, as well as there's this woman Loni, who actually stayed with the San people to learn their ways and stuff. The San people of the Kalahari here in Southern Africa. So these ones are the San people which are actually called the Jocahansi, type of a group. So because there's the ones that are different, but the ones we're focusing on is the Jocahansi San people here in Southern Africa, which are the oldest group, even older than the Bantu people having migrated to this side of life. Now, for them, who do they worship? The San people. The San people actually worship Tsagen. Tsagen, this is their god who they believe he had some characteristics of a trickster to some extent. So again, the god that the San people worship was a monotheistic deity. So they have a monotheistic worship, the San people. Not only them, we also find this monotheistic worship among the Hadzabe people and the Sandawe. We find the oldest groups here in Africa having a revelation of a monotheistic God instead of what we find among the Bantu people, where we have, uNomkhubulwane, where we have Mvelinqangi, where we have, Umhambi. When they worship God, then you would ask yourself, how did they view the ancestors or the people that are dead? In fact, not the ancestors, because the ancestors, even when we're a Christian, we have an understanding of where we come from, our forefathers. So let me not just bring like that. Let's say, did they view the ancestors as the intermediaries between God and man, the mediators between God and man, the sent people? Let's get to see them. When I say the sent people, just know I'm also including the Hadzabe and the Sandawe. Sent people had this view concerning the dead people. When the dead people would be shown, or the spirits of the dead people would appear in their camp, because we know what these are actually hunter-gatherers. They move from one place to another. So whenever now in their camp there was any sighting or any vision that constituted of a dead person, then they would call in a shaman. A shaman is different than a sangoma. While with the Bantu people, now we're speaking about the Bantu people, we're not talking about the prior Bantu people before 380. We're talking about the Bantu people after 380, when the ancestral mediation system has been introduced. The Bantu people then would actually begin to believe on Umvelinqangi, the one who appeared first. This is not really an idea of God, because God has actually been in eternal existence. There's never been a point where he appeared. So this is the first ancestor that is believed by the Bantu people after 380. Then they would be having Isangoma. Isangoma would be the person that would actually be the channel, the line between the Bantu people and their ancestors. So they would have Isangoma. Now, whilst the San people don't have the Sangoma, but they have a shaman, they are different, and I'm about to show you how they are different. So whenever there was something that had to do with illness or a vision concerning, a dead person, they would call out a shaman. Shaman would live in distant, corners or far away from the people when it comes to the San people, while Sangomas would actually, in many cases, would be part of the community in the ancient time, as around this time of 300, 980, then people would actually come, they would act like chiefs as well as spiritual guidance or oracles for the communities. When the shaman comes and someone is sick, we talk about the poison. So the shaman had a way of actually connecting with the spiritual realm. The way they connected with the spiritual realm, it's different than the way that sangomas would or still connect with the spiritual realm. The shaman would come to the person that is sick in the community. And when they come to the person that is sick in the community, this is their access to how they actually connect to the spiritual realm. They had a system that is called Nom. Nom is where they believed there's actually a force, a divine force given by the great creator. Now, when they speak about the great creator, they had the idea of a lesser creator as well. You also find, I don't know if this aligns with what in Judaism is found to be two gods that was believed prior to Christianity, where this is others who saw there's two gods in heaven, because there's another one who has a throne based on Daniel chapter 7, 13 to 14. I don't know if that is that revelation. No, I don't know. But however, now they had a system that is called Nom. What's important that I'm drawing your attention to is that they believe in a monotheistic, religion. So they had, and then they had a system that is called Nom. Nom, this is a belief that at the base of the spinal cord, at the base of a spine, any person's spine, or even the shaman's spine, or maybe the stomach, the center of a person's stomach, there is an energy. This energy, if it is actually well channeled, it can actually make someone to access the spiritual realm. Now, many people will think, no, this is the same thing that we find with sangomas. It is not, and I'm about to prove you that. So then whenever the shaman comes, then they would have a fire, a center, a place of fire, and then they would have the women surround this place of fire, and then the shaman as well as men would be dancing around this fire many times throughout almost the whole night because of this sick person. So the shaman then would actually begin to stay. This thing where they are doing dancing, it is actually called a trance dance. So they were beginning to stir this norm, this force that is innate in their bellies or at the base of their spine. When they stir it up. They would stir it to a point that it rises up as a heat. It would have to heat up until it reaches the head, which is the brain. When it bursts on the brain, they enter a state of consciousness, which is called the Kriya in the San people, the Kriya. So when they reach the Kriya, this is where now the shaman would actually be able to see the type of a thing that is causing sickness to the person, amongst the group of the San people, or the shaman would also be able to even access the realm of the spirit and then go to the great creator. Now, people would think this thing is done, through ancestral spirit. No. In this case, many cases, the shaman, this is the research that has been found by Richard Katz and others, that the shaman believed, as well as the San people, that in many cases sickness, when it enters the camp through even a single individual, it can be traced exactly to a Tlawasi. A Tlawasi, this is a spirit of a dead person. It doesn't matter who it is, but a dead person. So the San people have a higher belief that their God they worship, the monasteristic religion they stand on, it is that their God actually resides in the sky above, and that every dead person gets to reside with God in the sky above. They don't have any business with the people on earth. So if they see any vision or any sighting or something that seems to be portraying an omen that portrays now a dead person among someone or for someone in the camp, they would call a shaman for the shaman to actually perform the kriya, which is a trance dance. When the shaman performs the kriya, then they would actually see the sickness in this person who's sick and then begin to cast it or suck it out. And when they suck it out, one of the things they would do, they would actually address the Tlawasi. The Tlawasi, it is a spirit of a dead person who's coming to inflict this person. So they believed with the Tlawasi, the San people believe with the Tlawasi are involved, and that they are actually, they believe that the Tlawasi are the ones that are actually responsible for ill luck, such things as sickness, misfortune, accidents. Now, they don't want them among the camp. They try by all means to cast them out because they know the spirits of the dead bring misfortune. And by such means, when the shaman is in the clear state, the conscious state where he's in the realm of the spirit, and he sees the Tlawasi, they would tend to address it. In many ways, when they address it, they will address it in a belief system that they believe that there's a spirit from among their people. Then they would say, you have no portion here. Leave your families. We don't want you here. Go away. So this was a form or an exorcist system where they used to actually cast out the spirit of the dead from the community, because they understood that the spirit of the dead would actually linger around the camp. They are trying to be invited. So hence the same people would then try to cast the spirit out. If they are speaking and the shaman is trying to rebuke this spirit in that state of trance, the clear state, if this does not succeed, then in the very same state, this shaman would then ascend to the realms where he goes. They say they would go to actually the great creator, and then to negotiate with the great creator why that he shouldn't let this spirit actually terrorize or even invade the camp. And then that the great creator in many cases would actually pull this Tlawasi back instead of it being an evil spirit in the camp. So with the San people, the oldest group in Africa, we find that whenever they're looking at the dead people, they believe they are the result of misfortune, bad luck and everything. They do not make deals with them. And hence, when we look into the San people, we don't find any system of ancestral mediation where they are actually doing Ukuphahla, speaking to the dead. No, it's considered, making a deal with misfortune in that. And this is not only with the oldest people we know, which is the San. This system is actually done as well by the Sandawe. The Sandawe, they do not call this type of a system of the consciousness or transcendence the kriya, but they call it more than the symbol. So, but they would actually have the similar sort of a thing. And they also hold to monotheism as well as the Hadzabe. So that is the interesting thing. Now, but when you come here into South Africa, you realize that when a person who is actually a spiritual person in any family, clan, or a tribe, these people we speak about the sangoma. Now they actually attribute everything to Umvelinqangi, while the Sen look at Uqagen, which is God. So here the Bantu people are focusing on the first ancestor. The system they use to actually get to access information in the realm of the spirit, it's a system called Ubungoma. Ubungoma, it's where a sangoma would play drums or beats to actually get to inside, the spiritual realm. Now, what is interesting is when they get to this state, they get to a state of consciousness which is called Ukuphahla. It's different from Iya, because Ukuphahla, for those who don't, some sangomas get to use amatambo, but many cases, when you look at the most advanced system of, Ubungoma that is used in Africa today, it is the Ndau system. In the Ndau system, you realize that a sangoma would actually enter into a state where they lose consciousness. It is not the same as the Qiya, because in the Qiya, the shaman would actually be aware. He still retains his identity, his senses, he still retains his body, everything. Even when he tries to chase away the Kawasi, which is a spirit of a dead person, he's doing it in all his awakened senses. However, when you get to the Bantu people today, you realize that the ability to how they are actually able to enter Ubundao, Ugufemba, that process of Ugufemba is it's a dialect from Mozambique, which actually means to sniff out. They would do Ugufemba to sniff out witchcraft or the problem or the source of sickness in the family, Ugufemba. So when they enter in that state, which you would think it's clear but it's not, then the sangoma would actually lose its consciousness, and then a spirit would actually invade their body to use their vocabs and everything to speak to the people, and the spirit would retain its own identity in the body of the person it has possessed to speak to families, and would be considered the spirit of the dead, which is something that the same people would actually stand up against and condemn. So in this, then you would see with the channel, and in a way, the channel which is Idlozi, the dead person that actually is the mediator between people and God according to the Bantu. Idlozi would be the very source of all of this, where you find with the same people in Idlozi, the Kawasi is viewed as actually a source of misfortune. So this is where we see in Africa, it's not an African thing, it's not an African concept, this thing of Ukuphahla. It's not something that actually we say, no, it's really African. Now, we know like I said in the video, it actually, the earliest traces can be found in 300 AD, which is in the, which is actually in Gauteng as well as in K2 Limpopo, around 300 to 900 AD. Now, though there's a group of people that is earlier than that actually began to practice the ancestral mediation system. The group that began to practice it earlier, it was in 2500 BC. This is the group of, the Mesopotamian, we're talking about in Babylon. So this is way earlier than we can find the trace with the Bantu people, way earlier than we can find the trace with the Bantu people, where this ancestral mediation system evolved or even started from. So this system, we're talking about the system that is in line with the one used in most parts of Africa today. So in Babylon, there was this system of Ukuphahla, which is actually called the Kispum. That began around 2500 years BC. What is a kispum? The kispum, it means the breaking of bread, where they take bread or whatever they had in their families, beer or specific drink, ale, and then offer it to the ancestors. And in Babylon, when they did this, they would actually begin to call out names for the ancestors, name them by names, the same thing we do today in Africa, Msama and stuff. And when they do this, this was also, inclined to altars in graveyards concerning the elder people. What's also interesting about this that we find in Babylon, it is that in Babylon there was also the same practice of actually cleaning out graves for the dead people, as well as ukubambethisa, where the dead people were said to be cold, they need blankets and stuff. So this began right here in 2500 BC, when would actually be found the anthropologists as well as the linguistics. This was not in the language of the Bantu people prior to 300 AD. It was also not in anthropology or archaeological discoveries prior to 300 AD, but it actually began to creep in way later. So what we find that is quite interesting, it is that our people, the black people, actually kind of took this same system from the Babylonians. So we see that it has a way that it crept from Babylon all the way to Africa, South Africa and stuff. Hence we see that most the San groups, the Sandawe, the Hadzabe, do not hold to this. How did it creep to Africa? And why was the reason that this thing actually crept into Africa? What was the main reason? The main reason that archaeologists find, as well as the anthropologists, that this system of the keyspoon or ancestral mediation system crept into the black people, it is because of, if you look into these groups that hold on to monotheism, that do not venerate the dead, the San people, the Hadzabe, the Sandawe, the reason why you see the distinction between them and the Bantu people, it is because they are hunter-gatherers. Whenever any person is dead in their tribe, they would actually leave them, some would cover the person, then leave to say he will return back to nature, which is earth, to decompose, and then they would move on. However, in Africa, when the Bantu people, around this time in 380, this is the time now when the Bantu people would actually be introduced to agriculture, as well as, keeping of cattle. This is when black people keep cattle. So in this instance, black people then, what they did is, because now for the first time they would have, instead of traveling, since they were traveling from West Africa down to the south, when they found places in the south, then they would actually lean in to claim the land. Would be the land ownership. So when the elders would die in these tribes after 380, when the elders would die in these tribes, so people then began to bury the elders that are dead in this family who initially owned this land in the cattle kraal. This is this thing where you find in Broderstrom, in Gauteng, as well as in K2 Limpopo. Some of them you found in Maponga. So this is a system that began here. And then people now had a claim to say, if you come and then to have a claim to defend the land and to stay on, to protect inheritance. If you come and say, move on now, they would say, no, our great-grandfathers are dead and then they died here and then their bones are here. So people now began this system. This is a system where it began of ancestry, elders and stuff. And from then on, people would then go on to these graves, clean them, speak to this dead. And then Ukuphahla system evolved from then on. And then now it would become centralized to each tribe and stuff and so on. From then on now, we can trace it to say this is how it started, because black people stopped being like hunter-gatherers, like the San, Hadzabe, Sandawe, moving from one place to another, but then they would actually become what? People that are owners of land, and then they would have claim to land, and because of that they felt that they needed security of spiritual entities to protect them when it comes to inheritance, to cattle, as well as to their lands that belonged to them. And hence the elders and families would be spoken to after death, and then they would actually be buried among them, and then spoken to, buried in the cattle, kraal and stuff. So if this video blessed you, do not forget to like and to subscribe, and please share it with someone who believes in African spirituality, and just say something to think about. Don't condemn them, but just say something to think about, so that it arouses a discussion among them. Be blessed.